So before we get into the final segment of anti-furry history, time for another quick note. It seems a percentage of the anti-furry community that had viewed part 1 were not happy about it. I don't know if you're going to be joining us for part 2, but for anyone listening, here's something to understand. These were not created to stir up drama and contention. I like researching furry history. There's something fascinating to me in internet archaeology and exploring events and people that I wasn't around for in this fandom. And in doing so, I noticed evidence time and again of anti-furries going back to the mid-90s. This is intriguing to me, especially in light of the fact that the whole concept of anti-furries is a trending topic now in the fandom, and it's interesting to compare the differences and similarities between past and present. Everything that I'm referencing are real persons or events sourced from archives. I would encourage you to follow the links to the sources and use archives or the Wayback Machine or whatever else to do your own research if you so choose. Or, of course, you can choose to believe that all of this is just made up and remain in ignorance of how your own community or movement or whatever you see it as even began to exist. That said, let's dive in. By all accounts, Eric Bloomr appears to me to be the original anti-furry in the modern sense of the word, meaning someone who disassociated himself from the fandom and just became an out-and-out opponent of it. But he did not start off that way. Eric Bloomr was very much a furry and active in the fandom, and appears to have been so for quite some time. In 1998, he coined the term furry apologist or furry fence-sitter, and he meant it to be a demeaning term for fellow furries who were sitting by and making excuses for the fandom or allowing things to get out of control or go in a bad direction. His quote was that they sat by and let all this happen. A single word, a statement of principle, and a little courage was all that it took, but they found themselves incapable of mustering the will nor the backbone such an action required. They are truly the most craven, the most despicable of them all. Now, initially, this was directed to a small core of specific people in the fandom, but at the end of his involvement with the Burned Furs and Furry, finally accused the entire fandom as perpetrators and accomplices of these acts. Now, what were the issues that Eric Bloomr specifically had with the fandom? Well, it seems to have started off with his having an issue with a sexual element to the fandom. In 1998, Eric Bloomr, himself a furry artist, founded the Burned Furs alongside of Squee Rat. And the mission statement was simply, anthropomorphics fandom is being overrun by sexually dysfunctional, socially stunted, and creatively bankrupt hacks and pervs. And Squee Rat said that the group was composed of furs who have spoken up against fandom perversion and been burned at the stake for it. These were disputes that had happened once again on the original alt-fan furry messaging board system. Negative press coverage of the fandom at the time, mainly articles in which attendees discussed sexual practices with reporters, angered them as well. And many prominent furries of the time either quit the fandom or went into secrecy so as to not be associated with the negative attention. This quickly gave rise to an era of mutual demonization, and the Burned Furs were a symptom of schisms that had been raging in furry fandom up until that point. The group was accused of wanting to oppose some sort of anti-sexual vision on the rest of the fandom, despite many members of the organization being themselves creators of furry erotica. And certain members of the group either disliked gays, Christian furs, obscure fetishes, or erotic artwork. These were generally held up as examples of the overall burn fur ideology by various members of the group's opponents. Squee Rat wrote a full manifesto, and she stated that personal fetishes and unusual lifestyles were not a problem if kept as a private matter. She opposed public flaunting of what most would consider socially unacceptable behaviors. In particular, she derided the small minority of fans who insisted that a person could not be a furry without, for example, having an animal spirit or practicing veganism. But many critics considered Burned Fur a hate group due to the manifesto's harsh tone and the production of a number of t-shirts bearing the slogan, "I don't have a lifestyle, I have a life." The Burned Furs attracted the attention of some underground media outlets, including the Philadelphia Weekly, stating that they hoped that the Philly Fanatic sports mascot would be abducted and gang raped by fursuiters at a convention. Another article stated that this was something for everyone to stare at with a peculiar mixture of horror and intrigue. In another odd twist, one of the candidates for the governor of the state of Arizona was a burned fur named Scott Malcolmson, who came under scrutiny for having a furry character on Furry Muck and drawing erotic furry art. Burned furs were often accused of threatening and making physical attacks against their opponents, including death threats and sabotaging convention events. One known case of a burned fur actually threatening an opponent was the maintainer of the Burned Fur homepage, who during a heated flame war in 1998 said he would put his fucking head through a wall if he ever met Zydex at a convention. Zydex was another well-known furry of the time. And here's where the drama takes another strange twist. The founder of the Burned Furs, Eric Bloomr, started to get a lot of hate from his own community. Burned Fur and then gubernatorial candidate of Arizona, Scott Malcolmson, noted that Bloomrich hates, apparently for the sheer pleasure of hating, and noted that Bloomrich's extremist attitude was one reason that Burned Furs had started to leave the group. Conference became a battleground for the Burned Furs. Now, Conference was the site of the first furry convention in 1989, and at the time really was essentially the only furry convention. By this time frame, it had started to have consistent adult activity in it, which the Burned Furs were very unhappy about. So initially they proposed simply boycotting it and then attempted to start their own convention. Neither attempt really amounted to much of anything, but Conference in 2003 ceased running as a yearly convention. But of course, as we know, now there's hundreds of conventions worldwide in its place. As for Eric Bloomrich, he became increasingly more angry and more aggressive, now facing shunning not just in mainstream furry fandom, but in the burned fur community that he had essentially created. The last recorded interaction has Eric Bloomrich cussing out Zydex, the furry mentioned earlier, and ceasing all involvement in the fandom. These comments from some other veteran furries from 2013 indicate that they had a knowledge at that time of his whereabouts, and seems like at times he was a likable person, to them anyway. As far as I know, Eric Bloomrich remains absent from both the furry and anti-furry community, and ironically, the Burned Furs website that he helped to launch, after being shut down, the domain was purchased by a pornography company. The time frame for the ultimate demise of the Burned Furs and Eric Bloomrich leaving the fandom is roughly 2001, but on the way out, they helped to create something different, the Anti-Fur Collective, or Anti-Fur International, created on October 2000. It was labeled by its creators an outsider's psychological study of the furry fandom by anthropomorphic fans. Collective public discussions about the group quickly led to the conclusion, freely admitted by the creators, that the Anti-Fur Collectives, being a group of people that came together for the sole purpose of screwing with the minds of people who call themselves furry, was accurate. This involved false data and information, and the same general mocking and electronic hazing used on past and current anti-furry groups or movements. Some of the collective's most serious members were in talks amongst themselves to plan some way to return the furry culture back to the golden age of furry fandom, or at least steer its true ideals to be associated solely with the anthro and anthropomorphic label, while the rest of them continued electronic guerrilla warfare harassment against the fandom with such projects as the fake Christian anti-furry site Christian Parents Against Furries. The anti-furry collective ceased functioning in January of 2001, but not the mindset behind it. Eric Bloomrich and his contemporaries had provided a watershed moment in the fandom. Instead of wanting to restore decorum or the golden age in the fandom, in a loving, controlled way, we are now in an era of anti-furries who, although they still like the fandom and benefit from parts of it, want to be openly combative, antagonistic, and disruptive. This gave rise to the creation of the critic message boards and websites. These were ran by furries to troll other furries. A notable frontrunner in this space was Eat All Furries. It had started in the year 2002 as eternalrain.net, and eventually morphed into the separate website Eat All Furries and a live journal page, and at the height of its popularity it had two flagship characters or mascots, the Purple Monster and the Singing Circus Dog. That second mascot being a reference to one of the site's founders, but by 2004 the entire thing had devolved into drama and chaos. Users were greeted on September 11th, 2004 by an animated image of a crying wolf flying into the World Trade Center, and that was the end of the Eat All Furries website. In 2006, there was an attempt made to revive it. 2005 saw the return of the Burned Furs when Reverend Ash Maurice Cairo launched the group in November of that year. It wasn't long before the name was changed to Improved Anthropomorphics, but they adopted many of the principles from the Burned Furs movement, including trying to purge the fandom of subgroups such as Nazi furs or baby furs, and remove any kind of negative media attention, and try and purge the sexual element out of the fandom. By summer of 2008, due to waning interest and involvement, things were starting to fall apart, and it was officially shut down by April of 2009. Other anti-furry websites and associations from this time period include furfags.com, launched in 2006, and the Furluminati, which ultimately became known as LOL Furries, in 2006 as well. An offshoot group known as the Insurgency was dedicated to raiding and trolling other furries for their own amusement. Overlapping this time period from 2004 to 2009, we have God Hates Furries. Well, there seems to be less information on this site, so it was likely lesser well known. It's unique in that there's no clear ties to furry fandom, so it is in all possibility an anti-furry site that's truly persons who don't like the fandom and are not part of it. However, some of the over-the-top posts and commentary led some to believe that it was meant to be satire. A quote from the site's founder read as follows: "Furryism is like an onion. Consider an onion. It has layers upon layers of skin that can be peeled away. Furryism is like that, but instead of layers of onion skins, furryism has layers upon layers of what is scientifically known as horrible, disgusting shit. And like an onion, as you peel away more and more layers of horrible, disgusting shit, you tend to start weeping uncontrollably." Vivisector was initially founded to be a furry news and commentary web forum and give a platform for furries and anti-furries alike to discuss the biases of their individual subcultures. Vivisector demanded maturity from its participants and members, and failure to adhere to those policies would result in being blocked. The site ran from 2007 to 2017 until it inexplicably just ceased to exist, with no reason given. Eventually, an admin said the site would be returning, but when that didn't happen, an attempt was made to reestablish it, hosted on Kiwi Farms. Watch Your Step ran briefly from 2009 to 2010, and it maintained a hall of shame, or those that it sought to ban from furry. These were individuals who seemed to have been labeled as sources of drama or contention at the time. Some of them are still well-known figures in the fandom to this day, such as Lupine Assassin or Sniff Henkel. Whatever their intention, using rumors as a primary source of information simply heightened drama and contention in the fandom instead of helping to address any problems. This is similar to the various person-exposed videos that you tend to see on YouTube that lack any kind of concrete proof or source. Rumors, speculation, altered chats, or Kiwi Farms as a source. The Army of Humanity was a short-lived anti-furry group. It appears like it lasted about 3 months, and the initial intent was to gather artwork that was anti-furry themed in nature onto DeviantArt, a art-sharing website. I'm not sure what the nature of the art was, as they were ultimately banned from DeviantArt. Members with usernames such as Furry Hunter and Furry Griefer had the motto, "Fire burns everything and kill all non-humans." After being banned from DeviantArt, an attempt was made for a return with the motto, "We don't die, we multiply." Ultimately, this attempt was unsuccessful as well. To date, I'm not sure if there's any incarnations of the Army of Humanity floating around somewhere. Finally, we have the Anti-Furry Coalition, which originally ran from 2007 to 2012 and was self-labeled as a hoax website. It had an intended goal to be a resource center for people who would like to learn more about furries. It had a section of the site that offered downloadable and printable material, including 5 steps for staying furry-free and Are Furries Corrupting Your Children? Now, as far as I can tell, in the pretty consistent ongoing tradition of anti-furries up until this point, these were in fact furries who wanted to troll other furries. In 2013, a furry activist named Kaylee Stewart posted a petition on the site Care2 to try and gather petitions to shut down the Anti-Furry Coalition. She had a stated goal to gather 1 million signatures. She stated, "Dear furry persecutors, this mainly targets the Anti-Furry Coalition but goes out to all those who unjustly discriminate against furries. We have gained 1 million signatures on a petition and hereby ask you to please shut down your organization against furries. We have harmed no one and we would like to be treated fairly. That means no more anti-furry signs or escape the furry mazes for children, etc." Now, in actuality, the petition had only gathered 69 signatures. I don't know if Kaylee was counter-trolling or if she really believed that this organization was really persecuting furries. Either way, this was consistent with the ongoing pattern of trolling and satire. Present-day anti-furs have a lot in common with their predecessors, not just in technique, but sharing similar motives. And for those who really seem to think they're fighting against something, it's just as pointless and futile now as it was 20-odd years ago. The fact of the matter is that people, whether you agree with them or not, are going to do what they enjoy, and you're not really going to be able to dissuade them from it, as long, of course, as there is no harm done. For those whose motives were, or continue to be, to purge the fandom of truly harmful elements, that is an admirable and worthwhile goal. However, there's definitely better ways of going about it. If I'm going to be a part of something, I like to learn as much as I can about it. So after having dug through all this, I have to wonder how many modern anti-furries are ever going to be aware of or bother to try and find out about this history of a community that they choose to identify with. If you made it this far, I hope you found some of this informative, and thank you for watching.